Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how to paint this miniature for Midlam Miniatures, which might make a great proxy model for your games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar or Middle-earth strategy battle game. So the first thing I've done is I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. And now with some MacLeod blue, I'm going to come in and paint all of the tunic to the model. So it's this part here showing through underneath his waist, as well as the arms and everything on the back as well. Make sure you cover all of this tunic with a couple of layers of MacLeod blue. Now this isn't going to give us fantastic coverage on the first layer, but just build up in a couple of thin layers until we get a nice smooth even base coat of MacLeod blue all over the tunic to the model. I really like these sculpts by Midlam Miniatures. They've got some great personality. They come in a variety of different poses to really add some interest to your units on your battle games. And after a couple of layers of MacLeod blue, you can see we've built up to that nice smooth even blue colour all over his tunic. So now with some Celestia Grey, I'm going to come in and paint his hood and his trousers. Once again, this isn't going to give great coverage on the first layer, but by building up in a couple of thin layers of Celestia Grey, we'll get a nice solid light colour all over his hood and the trousers to the model. I find the blue and the white work really well together to create an interesting uniform colour for a city guard style model. So just make sure you take your time, build up to a solid colour in a couple of layers of Celestia Grey all over that hood and his trousers. Obviously be nice and careful when you're around the MacLeod blue, just building up till we get a solid colour all over those areas. And after a couple of layers of Celestia Grey, you can see we've built up to a nice solid colour all over his hood and his trousers. So now the next step is I'm going to paint the face on the model. So for this I'm coming in with some Bugman's Glow. I'm going to catch all of the skin on his face. Obviously being really careful at this stage around the Celestia Grey for the hood. Just make sure you cover all of the face in a couple of thin layers of Bugman's Glow to build up to a nice solid skin colour all over the face of the miniature. But you can leave the hair black at this stage. It doesn't matter if you get a little bit of Bugman's Glow over the hair, because we'll be coming in to paint this at a later stage. And after a couple of layers of Bugman's Glow, you can see we've really built up to a solid colour all over his face. So now it's time to paint his boots. For this I'm coming in with some Corvus Black. I'm going to make sure I cover all of his boots. Once again, being really careful around the Celestia Grey. Don't want to get any of this Corvus Black over the areas we've already painted. I'm going to make sure I get a solid layer all over his boots. And I'm also going to catch his scabbard at this stage as well. So this model's got this one here hanging down this side, and there's another scabbard for a little knife on his other side as well. So catch these with some Corvus Black. And with those details picked out, the next thing we're going to paint is the tiny little bit of wood that's on the model. So for this I'm coming in with some Dryad bark. And I'm just going to pick out the baton here hanging from his waist. Once again, be really careful around the other colours we've already applied. Just going to catch this little wooden baton with some Dryad bark. And with that batten picked out, the next step is I'm going to pick out any leather on the model. For the leather, I'm coming in with some Rhinox hide. I'm going to pick out all of the details that I want to look like leather. So it'll be his gloves here, his belt, any pouches, and all the straps holding the weapons to his body. I'm going to make sure I catch all of these with a couple of layers of Rhinox hide. See, these models are really great. They're really interesting poses and they're really fun to paint. Now, as well as Age of Sigmar, where these would work quite well as Cities of Sigmar miniatures, I could also imagine them being used quite well in games of D&D as city guard or random villagers. Just as a really interesting way to flesh out your campaigns of D&D with some extra characters. And now with some Avalanche Sunset, I'm going to come in and paint the hair to the model. So be nice and careful here around the skin we've already painted. I'm just going to pick out all of the hair with a couple of layers of Avalanche Sunset. So I'm going to paint this guy so he's blonde. Obviously, if you want to paint him with a different hair colour, just pick the hair out at this stage with whatever colour you want to paint the hair. And with that hair picked out, the only details left to base coat now are the couple of metallic details on the model. So for these with some lead belcher first, I'm going to come in and pick out the chainmail showing through here on his arms. Just be nice and careful around the other colours we've already painted. As well as the crossguard and the hilt to his sword and his dagger, just catching these with a little bit of lead belcher as well. And he's got a belt showing from his waist as well, so I'm going to catch this with just a little bit of lead belcher. With that lead belcher applied, there's just one last base colour left to apply. And that will be some Retributor armour. I'm just going to use to pick out this clasp here on his chest. And with that clasp picked out, that is all the base coats applied to the model. So the next step is to shade the miniature. So for shading, first of all I'm coming in with some Reichland Flesh Shade. I'm going to apply this all over the skin and the hair to the model. Fine for blonde hair, Reichland Flesh Shade works really well as a shade colour. Obviously if you painted this as a different colour, you may wish to shade it with a different shade. And now with some Nuln Oil, I'm going to shade the rest of the miniature. Just apply this all over the rest of the model, so the hood, the gloves, the tunic, all the metallic details, the wood, and all the areas of black. Just make sure you shade all of the model with some Nuln Oil. These models are really fun to paint. They're metal models, so they are a little bit heavier than a lot of people are used to if you're used to only painting plastics. But they are really fun models to paint. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below. And now those shades have dried, you can see they've added definition all over the miniature. So it's time to start highlighting the model. The first one, I'm going to highlight the skin, so I'm coming in with some Bugman's Glow again. I'm going to apply this to all the areas of the face that the shade didn't settle. So wherever there's some Reichland flesh shade in a recess, I'm coming in on either side of it with some Bugman's Glow to bring those areas back up to colour, but leaving that shade in all of the recesses so it keeps the definition we've added to the face. By keeping your Bugman's Glow nice and thin at this stage and picking out these areas the shade didn't settle, we'll start building up that transition to our lightest highlights while allowing some of the darker colours to show through. Just make sure you pick out all of the areas that the shade didn't settle, bring them all back up to colour with a layer of Bugman's Glow. And with that Bugman's Glow applied, you can see we've brightened up those areas of the face. We've left all of that Reichland flesh shade in the recesses. So now with a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian flesh tone, I'm going to apply this in the middle of the areas that we just applied the Bugman's Glow. So wherever we applied a little bit of Bugman's Glow at the previous step, I'm going to come in the middle of those areas and apply a little bit of this mix, but focusing it onto the most raised details and highest points. So this will help build up that transition to our brighter highlights, really adding definition to the skin, giving that appearance of light catching all of the raised surfaces. Just be nice and neat, place some of this mix in the middle of the areas that we just applied our previous layer. And with that mix applied, we're really starting to build up that transition to our lightest highlights all over his skin. So now with some pure Cadian flesh tone, I'm coming in again and applying this in the middle of the areas that we just applied that previous mix. Really focusing this up into smaller areas and smaller points on all the most raised areas of the face, applying a little bit of pure Cadian flesh tone in the middle of all the areas that we applied our previous layers, really building up to that brightest point on all of the raised details. And with that Cadian flesh tone applied, there's just one more colour left to apply to the skin. And that'll be with some Kislev flesh. I'm going to come in and just apply a small point of this on all the most raised details. So it's things like his eyebrows, the tip of his nose, his bottom lip and chin, and any sharp points on the face, things like his sharpest cheekbones, his jawline, the tops of his ears, just all the sharpest points. I'm just applying a really thin line of Kislev flesh to add as a final highlight. And with that Kislev flesh applied, there's all the skin on the model highlighted. So the next step is I'm going to paint the eyes. So for this I'm coming in with some Abaddon Black first. Going to apply some of this into the recess of his eye sockets. Obviously being really careful around all the other colours we've already painted. Sinking a little bit of black into his eyes. And now with some white scar, I'm going to come in and paint a really thin line within that black we just applied. Keep these lines nice and thin, just apply a little bit of white in those eyes. And with some black again, I'm going to come in and put a small vertical line in the middle of the eye. This will act like a pupil. Keep these nice and small, just apply a little vertical line in the middle of the white. And with those eyes painted, there's all the details to the face and the eyes highlighted. So now it's time to start highlighting his tunic. So for this, I'm coming in with some MacLeod blue again first. And And once again, I'm applying this on all the areas that the shade didn't settle. So wherever there's some known oil in a recess, coming in on all the raised areas next to it, bringing it back up to colour with a thin layer of MacLeod blue. You take your time at this step. This tunic is quite a lot of the model. It's really worth taking your time to make sure you get this looking as tidy as possible. Just make sure you catch all of those raised areas where the shade didn't settle. Bring it back up to colour with a thin layer of MacLeod blue. And with that MacLeod blue applied, we brightened up those areas of the tunic, but left all the definition that the shade gave us. So now with a 50-50 mix of MacLeod blue and Altdorf Guard blue, coming in, I'm going to apply this once again in the middle of the areas that we applied our previous step. Focusing this onto the most raised areas and the highest folds on the tunic, I'm just going to apply a little bit of this mix in all the areas that we just applied the MacLeod blue. This line of miniatures has so many different options for different NPC characters for your games, or additional troops for your games of Warhammer Fantasy. And with that mix applied, you can see it's brightened up that tunic again as we're building up towards our highlight. So now with some Altdorf Guard blue, and once again applying a little bit of this in the middle of all the areas that we just applied our previous layer. So really focus this towards the sharpest edges, most raised folds. Just apply a little bit of Altdorf Guard blue on all these creases. Just take your time at this step. Make sure you apply a little bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas that we've applied our previous layers. And with that Altdorf Guard blue applied, there's just one last colour left to apply to the tunic to highlight it. And that will be an edge highlight of Calgar blue, which I'm just going to apply on all of the sharpest creases and folds. So the tops of all these sharp creases, I'm just applying a thin edge highlight of Calgar blue. It's catching the very edges, most raised details. I'm also going to apply an edge highlight all the way around the edge of the tunic as well. But keep these lines nice and thin, and just apply an edge highlight of Calgar blue on all the sharpest points of the tunic. And with that Calgar blue applied, that is the tunic highlighted. You can see we've got a really nice transition up to our brightest edge highlight. So now with some Celestra Grey, time to start highlighting the light areas. So for this, once again, I'm applying this in all the areas that the shade didn't settle, coming in and brightening the rest of the areas back up to Celestra Grey, but leaving that known oil in all of the recesses so we keep that definition. Keep the Celestial Grey nice and thin at this stage, and slowly build these areas back up to their original brighter colour as we work towards a highlight. To be nice and careful around other colours, but just apply some Celestial Grey on all the raised details of his hood and his trousers. And with that Celestial Grey applied, you can see he's really brightened up those areas of his trousers and his hood. And now, with a 50-50 mix of Celestial Grey and White Scar, and once again coming in and applying this in the middle of all the areas that we just applied the Celestial Grey. So focus this to the most raised areas, the most prominent folds and creases. Just apply a little bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas that we just applied the Celestial Grey. Once again, keep this nice and thin to allow a little bit of the previous layers to show through. Apply a little bit of this mix in all the areas we just applied the previous step. And with that mix applied, that's brightened up those areas of hood and trousers. So now there's just one last colour to apply to highlight these areas. And that'll be some pure White Scar, which I'm going to apply as an edge highlight on all the sharpest details and most prominent folds. So by applying this White Scar over the Celestial Grey base coat, it will make these areas read like white, which will look like a really interesting contrast against the blue for the rest of the uniform. So just catch all the most prominent details on his hood and his trousers with a thin edge highlight of White Scar to really make these areas stand out. And with that White Scar applied, you can see it's really made all of those areas of hood and trousers pop and give an interest all over the model. So now it's time to start highlighting the black areas. For this I'm coming in with some Eshin Grey first. I'm going to apply this as a chunky highlight around the edges of all the areas we painted black. So on the boots, it's picking out the edges, any creases, folds, any prominent details on the boots. I'm catching these with a chunky edge highlight of Eshin Grey. And for the scabbard, I'm just doing a chunky edge highlight down the edges of the scabbard. And on the handle as well. With the Eshin Grey applied, that's a chunky highlight on all these areas of black. It gives us room to come in and apply another highlight within that Eshin Grey. And that highlight will be some Mechanica Standard Grey, which I'm going to apply as a thin edge highlight within all the areas we just applied the Eshin Grey. So keep this really thin, just focus it to the edge or highest points of all of these areas. Just place a really thin edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey within all the areas we just applied the Eshin Grey. So take your time at this step and just make sure you apply a really thin edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey within all the Eshin Grey. That Mechanica Standard Grey applied, that's all the black details highlighted. So now it's time to highlight the leather details. For highlighting leather, I'm coming in first with some Mornfang Brown. I'm going to apply this as a chunky highlight on all the areas of leather. So on the gloves here will be the edges, all the raised creases and folds, and any details, kicking these out with a chunky highlight of Mournfang Brown. I'm also going to do this to the pouch, hanging from his waist. I'm going to give a chunky highlight all over the pouch. And I'm going to do this to the belt and all the straps holding the weapons on, and catching all of these with a chunky edge highlight of Mournfang Brown. And with that Mournfang Brown applied, you can see we've got a chunky edge highlight all over those leather details. And now with some XV88, I'm going to apply a thin edge highlight within that Mournfang Brown. So keep these really nice and thin and just focus them onto the most raised and sharpest details of all the leather, but just apply a little bit of XV88 in the middle of all the areas that you just applied the Mournfang Brown. These two colours will work really well together to give the appearance of slightly worn, rough leather. So just make sure you catch all the areas we applied with Mournfang Brown with an edge highlight of XV88. With that XV88 applied, that is all of the leather details highlighted. So there's only a couple of details left to highlight on the model. Now with some Baneblade Brown, I'm going to come in and highlight the batten. For this, I'm just going to catch the handle with a couple of highlights on any raised details. For the main batten, I'm just going to add some vertical lines going down the batten, keeping these nice and thin. Let's just give the appearance of wood grain on that batten. And with that batten highlighted, the next step is I'm going to highlight the hair on the model. And for this, I'm coming in with Tau Light Ochre. I'm just going to pick out any of the raised strands on his hair with a thin highlight of Tau Light Ochre. Between the Everland Sunset base coat, the Reikland Flesh shade we applied as well, Tau Light Ochre will work really well to give the appearance of blonde hair on the model. Now you can dry brush this stage if you wish, but there is a risk that you'll catch some of the skin while applying the dry brush, so I just apply it as a regular highlight. And with that hair highlighted, all that's left to do now is to highlight the metallics. First of all, I'm coming in with some Liberator Gold, and I'm going to highlight the little area we painted with Retributor Armour, just giving this an edge highlight of Liberator Gold. Finally, with some Stormhost Silver, I'm going to apply an edge highlight to all the areas we paint with Lead Belcher. So I'm picking out any of the links we can see on the chainmail undersuit. I'm going to give an edge highlight to the crossguard, pommel, and any other metallic details we picked out. And with that Stormhost Silver applied, that is how to paint a City Guard model from Midlam Miniatures. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below. Are there any other models from any other companies you would like to see me paint? But thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!